name is Jessica, and I'm a community educator at Keep Truckee Meadows Beautiful. Has anyone heard of Keep Truckee Meadows Beautiful? Awesome. Okay, so a good portion of you guys. So we're an environmental nonprofit based here in Reno, and we focus on a lot of different aspects within the community, and I'll talk about those. But today we're going to be talking about zero waste and zero waste lifestyle and how to be more sustainable. And this is Kim too, if you want. And then she'll be talking about the zero waste lifestyle and how to be sustainable. And I'll be taking it away with Keep Truckee Meadows Beautiful and what we do. Okay. So like I said, we're an environmental nonprofit based here in Reno, and we focus on 4 aspects, and I'll go into those. Beautification, advocacy, cleanups, and education as well. And we're established in 1989, so we've been around for 30 years. This is our 30th anniversary. And we also have AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps people usually, well, I'm an AmeriCorps too. So basically what we do is we sign a contract where we will be with the community or an organization from 6 months to a year, helping the community through whatever that organization is focused on, I guess. So I did a term last year that also was focused on environmental education, and then this year I'm doing it again, but with a different organization, Keep Truckee Meadows Beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to move that little mouse. But first, we have beautification. Basically, why we want to focus on beautification in our community and all communities as well is basically you can't have a clean and safe area if a place isn't also beautiful. That's usually just how it goes hand in hand. And there has been a study that says proximity to clean and open spaces raises property values by 20% or more. And according to something called Reimagine Reno, in 2016 there was a survey done basically to see how we can change our master plan or change how Reno is like seen and what we can do to make Reno a better place to live for our residents. And what they saw with that survey was the top thing that people wanted out of Reno was to have a more like outdoorsy area where people can come and do recreational activities focused on the outdoors. So in order to focus on the outdoors, it has to be beautiful and safe. So that's what Reno is heading toward. And recreation also brings tourism and free and healthy opportunities for residents. In advocacy, we want to raise awareness about certain problems in our community. Most problems that communities are facing are not only here, but are also in other places in the country. One huge thing in Reno specifically, though, and in Washoe County, is illegal dumping. Basically, illegal dumping or an illegal dump site is litter on a large scale, and litter is very expensive. In 1 year, Reno alone will spend about $500,000 just to clean it up every year. So it's very expensive. For instance, like even with a tire, if you were to pick up a tire off the side of the road where it's not supposed to be, where it's illegally dumped, it would cost you about $40 to properly dispose of it and to have the manpower to go out and pick it up. Whereas if you were to properly dispose of it in the first place, it would only cost $2. So there's a lot of cost disparity between a lot of objects that are found on the side of the road and properly disposing of it. And more than 80% of litter is willful and therefore preventable. And that's where the illegal dump sites will come in. And Keep Truckee Meadows Beautiful has come together with other organizations to create the illegal dumping task force, basically to make sure that we know what's going on with the illegal dump sites and to properly report them. So to report the illegal dump sites, we came up with a 329 DUMP, which is a number that you can call if you ever see an illegal dump site. And then the Washoe County Sheriff's Office put together the 785 WCSO number, the dispatch number, for illegal dump sites that are in action. So if you see someone that is actively dumping a car or dumping something out in the middle of nowhere, that's the number that you would call. And usually they want you to stay on the line so then they can catch that person, because they will catch them and eventually they will arrest them. There have been people arrested for illegally dumping things, and that's one mugshot. from one illegal dumper. And we also do cleanups throughout the year. We have 2 huge cleanups that we do every year. One is in September, and it's called the Truckee River Cleanup. Next year it's on September 26th. Basically what we do with the Truckee River Cleanup is we have different sites throughout along the Truckee River, so all the way from Verdi to Lockwood. And what we do is we try to have volunteers as long as us to go through the river and go through the parks along the river to make sure that they're clean, and we get rid of weeds as well, because those can also wreak havoc on the area and can cause erosion that we don't want and sediment in the river. We also have the Great Community Cleanup, which is every spring. Next year is going to be in May 2nd. And we do the same thing. We get volunteers out to help us clean up the areas, but this one is focused on large open spaces and parks. So basically with that, we'll go out to open spaces and focus on illegal dump sites. So we will pick up the larger items. So we get trucks out there, we pick up things from like hot tubs to cars, or even just like the little things, because litter attracts litter and trash attracts trash. So when someone sees a giant pile of like cars or hot tubs or something, they'll put little things in there too, and it's really difficult to pick up, but that's why we're here, to take care of it. We also have Adopt a Spot, and with that offers more opportunity to do cleanups throughout the year, not only with the September and the May cleanups. So with Adopt a Spot, you can come to Keep Truckee Meadows Beautiful, and we will let you borrow some of our tools so that you can go out with either like your neighborhood or like a club or maybe like a class or something, and you can pick a spot that hasn't already been taken basically, and you can go out and clean it up. So with this program is really cool because, as you can see, they have like a little sign. So once you have cleaned up an area 3 times throughout the year and have also attended a big cleanup, you will get a sign that has like your club or your class's name on there, which is pretty cool. So with that one, that was for Intuit. So they did a good job. And finally, we have the Christmas tree recycling. That is also a volunteer opportunity. This year, we're holding it from December 26th through January 7th. So what we do is we take people's real Christmas trees and then we put it in the wood chipper. So if you want to have your tree wood chipped, you would bring it to us, and then we would wood chip it, and later we would use the wood chips for either like weed abatement, or we give it back to the community. And sparks, people use it for like their local parks and such, so when kids land, they don't hurt themselves. So if you want to volunteer for that, we have 3 different locations. There's one at Bartley Ranch and also the Reno Sports Complex. We have a sign too. The Reno Sports Complex, and also Shadow Mountain, which is right by Reed High School. And in 2018, these were our impacts. For the Christmas tree recycling, we recycled 10,031 trees with 324 volunteers, and 121,000 pounds of trash was collected with the help of 1,589 volunteers during the Truckee River Cleanup and the Great Community Cleanup. And finally, we have education. So we educate youth as well as adults, like today. With youth, we focus on invasive weeds, watershed, and also trash and litter and how to properly recycle. With adults, we talk about a little bit more topics. We talk about like zero waste like today, so we talk a little bit about recycling as well and how to be more sustainable. We talk about weeds too, invasive weeds. We talk about watersheds, and we also do composting, because we did a composting here a while ago, like a month or 2 ago. So yeah, we talk about a wide variety of things because we want to make sure that, like with the youth, that's teaching them to go forward in their lives to be more sustainable. But with adults, you guys are able to make change things now, so that's really important. And we also have recycling guides, which we have here today too, which are helpful little guides that tell you how to properly dispose of items that you can't put in your curbside bin, like household hazardous waste or light bulbs and batteries. It tells you where to take those and phone numbers for the businesses as well. And in 2018, we educated 8,400 children and adults, and it was reached through the Warriors Youth Program, because we call it Waste Warriors and Weed Warriors, to have it like a cute name. So then once they're done, we call them a Waste Warrior, and they're really excited. And we have our adult education program, but you guys can be warriors too. Okay, and now we're going to move on to like the zero waste and the sustainable lifestyle, and I'll hand it off to Kim.
Awesome, thank you, Jessica. Okay, so now that we've learned a little bit more about what we do as an organization, I think it's appropriate to talk about what else we can do to help combat and mitigate our global waste problem. So I'm sure you're all aware that we do have a pretty big trash problem, not only globally, but here in our community as well. And so let's start with a simple question. How do we define trash? What's the definition of trash? Anybody? Stuff, junk. Discarded stuff, great. It's not a very scientific definition there, but basically, yes, trash is basically stuff we don't want anymore. It doesn't matter what condition the item is in, whether it could be recycled or composted, whether the item can be donated instead or repaired or reused in some way, shape, or form. The minute that object stops having value to us is when it becomes trash. Now for a little bit more of a complex question here. How much trash are we generating? So let's talk about the United States. How much trash do you think Americans generate per person per day in pounds? I don't know if you guys noticed anything over here, but yeah. I mean, I won't give it away, but something here. Well, close. That was actually the answer for my next question, but on average, Americans generate close to 6 pounds of trash per person per day. How about here in Washoe County?
8 pounds. Hey.
It's about 8.1 pounds of trash per person per day, which is, I'd say, it's pretty bad. And if you wanted a visual, this is about 8 pounds. I don't know if you kind of wanted to weigh it out a little bit to kind of give you an idea of just how much, on average, Americans, or here in Washoe County at least, residents generate per person per day in pounds. What do you think the number one thing we send to the landfill is here in our country?
Yard waste.
Food, yard waste. Actually, you're right. So the number one thing, oh, oops, did I not? There we go. The number one thing we dispose of is food. Households, American households, about 40% of American households dispose of food. So to put that into perspective, it's about 20 pounds of food waste per person. So total, it's about 23 million tons of food that goes wasted every year. What about here in Washoe County?
Food? Oh, it's got to be more.
It's also food. So we fall under that statistic, the national statistic there. Not too long ago, it was actually last year, Washoe County decided to take a look at what exactly it is that we're throwing away. And so they conducted a waste characterization report where it literally entailed people going in and seeing what was being taken to the transfer station. So there were studies that were conducted at the 3 transfer stations, so Stead, Incline, and Sage transfer stations. And we all know what a transfer station is, right? It's where your garbage goes before it gets transported to the landfill. And they were measuring so they took samples in the spring and in the fall of 2018, and they were measuring different types. So they were measuring what was being collected from the garbage trucks. So a lot of residential and commercial municipal solid waste. They did studies around self-haul as well, which is what people and businesses would actually take themselves to the transfer stations using a truck of some sort. And then also a different one, I forget, I think it was construction and demolition. So the results showed that an extraordinarily high amount of organic materials were being thrown away. So this chart here, this pie graph, shows you the results of residential and commercial municipal solid waste that was collected by the garbage trucks, so on collection days. And we realized that the number one thing that we're basically sending to the landfill is food waste, which came in at 22.6%. And then second on the list, and you were actually pretty spot on there, it was yard waste. You can't see it there, but it's 15.3% yard waste. When I first, and a lot of the people that I work with, saw the results of this study, we were kind of mind blown. We were like, wow, really, organic material? That's the number one thing. I think it's close to 50% of what we're sending to the landfill. And it seems kind of silly too, because what else can you do with your organic materials? You can compost it, and then that's when it clicked. Unfortunately, our community does not have residential composting collection services. We don't have a composting facility. So really, unless you compost at home or have a farm and have lots of animals you can feed your food waste to, the only alternative is the landfill. However, dry recoverable fiber at 11.9%, which comes in at third. Does anyone know what dry recoverable fiber is? Right, the fiber kind of confuses people, but it's actually paper. Just paper, cardboard, paperboard, paper. Paper that obviously can be diverted, and we do have the system set in place where it can be. You can recycle it, right? You can recycle paper. And this wet contaminated fiber, which comes in at fourth, I believe. That's paper that can't be composted, it can't be recycled. It may be composted, depending on the type of paper. And then other things that kind of pop up are recyclable plastics like PET, HDPE, those can be recycled. Aluminum, a lot of the mixed ferrous metals like tin and aluminum. Even hazardous waste, it's not a lot, but it's definitely something we don't want to be sending to the landfill. Electronic waste as well is something we want to be getting rid of properly, which is where our handy dandy recycling guide comes into play. And then textiles. Now textiles would be our clothing, our fabrics. And that one isn't as significant, but it is still pretty significant in this sense. I think it's close to 3% of what we're sending to the landfill. So when we talk about trash and where it goes, we obviously know our trash doesn't disappear, right? It just doesn't go away. Even though we're saying, oh, just throw it away, it doesn't actually go away. So we know that our trash gets sent to the Lockwood landfill. Have any of you been to the Lockwood landfill before? It's not like we have that on like our bucket list or anything, right? It's like, oh, I want to go to the landfill so bad. But honestly, it's a really eye-opening experience once you are really aware of sort of our trash problems. But so the landfill, for starters, isn't miles and miles and miles and miles away in the middle of nowhere. It's pretty close to town. If you hop onto I-80 heading east towards Fernley, passing Sparks, it's about, I'd say like a 25-minute drive, 25 to 30-minute drive, and then you're at the landfill. It's there. It's this giant mountain. And so landfills are very interesting. It's a very interesting and beneficial approach to our waste problems. And they've been around. This concept of a landfill has been around for some time now. Just think ancient Greek and 300,000 BC time span. But and we've always just been trying to figure out a way to manage our trash. And landfills, this concept isn't a new one. However, they are really high tech, because if you think about all of the stuff that we're sending to the landfill, we want to make sure that these items aren't escaping into our environment and contaminating our air, our water supply. And so landfills, and this is the case for ours and many across the country and in the world, have to have a liner to prevent items like leachate. And leachate is landfill terms for basically a liquid where, depending on the contents of the landfill and how long it is, this liquid percolates on inside within the landfill, and it can become really toxic over time. And so we don't want that toxic liquid to escape. And so we have a liner to prevent it from getting into our groundwater. Our landfill is geographically unique because it's actually located in a canyon, and it relies on the thick clay of the canyon as a natural liner, which is pretty cool. Something else is, once things begin to decompose, they begin to release toxic gases as well. Does anyone know what kinds of gases get emitted? Methane. Right here, methane. So methane is a very, very strong greenhouse gas. It's about 25 times worse than carbon dioxide, and it's one of those leading contributors to global warming and climate change, both buzzwords these days, right? And so we have to make sure that we're not emitting those gases into our atmosphere. And so what landfills have done is they've built a series of pipes that are able to capture methane gas, and then they transport it to a treatment facility where then it gets converted into energy, and then the energy gets used to power homes in our community. Pretty cool, right? But it's not a 100% capture rate, unfortunately. And methane basically comes about because of all of the organic material that is ending up in our landfills. So when organic materials begin to decompose, because they're decomposing in such a unnatural environment, I mean, you tell me, what do items need in order to decompose? Air. That's a big one. What else? Water, moisture. What else? Heat. Heat. You have some microorganisms and bacteria and decomposers and time. There's all of these factors that come into play. And so when you're burying things and you're depriving of these items from oxygen, they begin to decompose anaerobically or without oxygen. And so instead of these organic materials breaking down into nutrient-rich soil like they would in a compost pile, they break down and they release methane instead. So we learned that we're sending close to a little over 8 pounds of trash per person every day. That totals to about 5,600 tons of trash every day is what we're sending to the landfill. And that's during the summertime. In the winter, it's slightly less because we're not sending as much yard waste. As we learned, there's a lot of yard waste that gets sent, and that's seasonal. But about 5,600 tons in the summertime, spring, summer, fall. So that's the equivalent of sending 700 elephants to the landfill every day. By the end of the year, our landfill will have received close to 2.1 million tons of trash. That's just this really bizarre number. We can't even picture that. But that's just it. When we're just sending all these things to a landfill, by definition, a landfill will fill up. And once it does, we'll most likely have to create another landfill or perhaps send our trash to distant places to be dealt with. When our landfill is full, it'll be more than 300 feet deep. So if you can just imagine a giraffe, and then now imagine stacking 13 or 17 giraffes, one on top of another. That's a pretty significant height there, 300 feet deep. So our landfill will be 300 feet deep and more than 150 football fields lengthwise wide. So landfills are beneficial because a lot of what we're consuming doesn't have an alternative. It can't be composted, it can't be recycled. It could possibly reduce, reuse, or we'll talk about the R's in a second. But landfills aren't meant to be a place where we send items that truly belong in the landfill and have no other alternative, because we want to extend the lifespan of a landfill in order to prevent it or keep it from filling up super quick. And in turn, it will prevent us from having to construct another one. So that's kind of the nature of our trash in a landfill. Now let's talk a little bit about what happens to our trash once it ends up as litter, which oftentimes happens. I mean, how many of you guys have seen plastic bags blowing down the street, Walmart parking lot, caught in a tree branch, I don't know, diapers, dirty diapers in parks, glass bottles on the sides of our roads, crushed cans? I mean, eventually, our trash ends up somewhere on our environment. How long do you think it'll take for these items to decompose, to go away? So we're going to play a game. And we're going to play a guessing game. We're going to play a guessing game, and ooh, you guys know the answers.
We're not going to play.
Okay. If you guess correctly, you get a prize. Oh, I'm glad you guys came back today. That's awesome. Cool. Oh gosh. I won't do all of them. I'll do plastic though. I like talking about plastic. Okay. All right, let's start with an easy one. So when we talk about items that we use day to day, and we're talking about how things begin to break down and decompose, you have to think about where the item came from, what resources we used to create an item. So where did we get our orange? It's just a store. True. This is actually, yeah, from Michael's. It's fake orange. So we got this from a tree, and a tree was living at one point when we got this. So things like that are going to break down a lot quicker. We call those biotic, items that came from something that was once living, as opposed to things that came from something that was not once living, like glass. Where do we get glass from? Yeah, sand. And so since this is biotic, what does this make? What does that make this? Abiotic! Hey! Oh, you're on my good list. Okay, so how long do you think it'll take this orange peel to decompose? 2 months. Within a month? Okay. So it's about 3 to 5 weeks. So we'll put that here. What about cardboard?
I want to say probably the same, close to the orange, so probably like a month, maybe 2.
Actually, that's exactly right. It's 1 to 3 months, so you get a prize.
Yeah.
See me later. Okay, so making our way down the line. Ooh, okay, so I labeled this because a lot of people were like really confused as to what this was. A cigarette butt. How long do you think that'll take to decompose? It's about 10 years. I know. Those little tiny little cigarette butts that you see everywhere are going to be there for a really, really long time if nobody picks them up. So that's important. That's why it's important to educate our population that smokes on not just flicking their cigarette butts when they're done smoking. Okay. What about aluminum? Ooh. Where do we get aluminum from? What do we use to, or what mineral? What mineral do we use? It's an ore that we extract from other countries. Bauxite. Sorry, that I had to ask because there's people out there who know this, and they get 2 prizes. Bauxite. How long do we think it'll take for this aluminum can to decompose, more or less?
Oh boy.
25 years.
100 years.
Huh?
100 years.
How many hundreds? Or 100? Yeah, 100. Oh, close. 500 years.
I was close.
500 years.
You knew it was it was like in the hundreds.
In the hundreds. 500 years, which is why it's sort of annoying when you see things like this end up as litter or even in the trash, because what else can you do with aluminum cans? You can recycle it. And aluminum is just one of those materials that can be recycled infinite amounts of times, which means there is no limit to the amount of times this can could be made into something new and recycled again. And it takes only 6 weeks for this aluminum can to be recycled and sold back on a store shelf. 6 weeks is like a month and a week or 2, depending what month it is. It's not that long. So make sure you're recycling your cans instead of throwing them away. Diapers. Disposable, single-use diapers. They've got synthetic material in there for sure. So diapers are kind of the same story. They're going to take roughly about 500 years to decompose as well. So news flash. You use cloth? Oh, air high five. Oh, air high five. Yes, that's a good alternative. Well, my diapers are still in the landfill, and possibly my parents as well. I don't know, somewhere. But yes, diapers and aluminum will essentially be on our planet for a really long time. How about glass? 3,000. I like where you're heading here because you're noticing the trend here, right? 1,000,000 years. Crazy. 1,000,000 years. How many of you have heard of those beaches in California? And huh?
I went to there, Glass Beach.
Glass Beach.
Fort Bragg.
Fort Bragg. There we go. Glass Beach. That's why. They don't go away. It's there still.
The Glass Beach.
Right.
Students too. Not that much glass left because everyone took it.
Because, yeah.
Can we do that?
Yeah, exactly. See, it's all connected. But that sort of paints a picture in your head of what happens. It begins to break apart, but essentially it will never. I mean, 1,000,000 years it's never. All right, what about plastic? Where do we get plastic? What resource do we use to create plastic?
Something with chemicals that they add together and it turns into plastic.
Yep, that's exactly right. Petroleum, oil. And how long do you think it'll take for this to decompose?
500 million.
Never, ever, ever. So that's the thing with plastics. Plastics never fully decompose, much like our glass scenario, plastics just begin to break apart into tinier pieces of plastics called microplastics that are basically found on every corner of our planet. Even plastics in its full form are basically everywhere in our planet. And it's kind of funny because have we had plastic for a long time?
No.
Do you remember a time without plastic? I don't know. I don't. Plastics were still around when I was growing up, but during my grandparents' era, no. Plastics are a relatively new invention. I mean, it's only been around for 50, 60 years. It didn't actually come into the market to consumers until like the 50s, when plastic, especially single-use plastics, were being marketed as a great alternative to washing your dishes. And so why spend time washing dishes when you can just buy disposable everything? Spoons and forks and cups and plates, and just throw it away. And so fast forward to today, we're just starting to realize the humongous impact that plastics have on our environment. Plastics never decompose, so every single plastic that we've created is still around and will be around for basically ever. But not only that, but also think about the impact that our waste has on the environment as well. I like to bring up, I guess, our star celebrity sea turtle. Have you guys seen the I think it was like a video of a sea turtle with the nose, or it had a nose, with the straw up its nose. A lot of wildlife is mistaking our trash for food. There isn't a day that goes by where you don't read of a whale that washes up on a beach somewhere with just a bunch of garbage in its guts. And it bioaccumulates, and then eventually traces end up in us as well. And so I don't know what happens to us once we have plastics in our system, and there is research being done now to determine what the impacts our trash, and especially plastics, single-use plastics, have once it ends up in us as well, because who eats the fish that eats the plastic, right? So in order to understand how we got to be to this point where we're just having this big trash problem, we have to take a look at the sort of economy we've created. So it turns out that we have been living in a very linear economy for some time now, but it hasn't been the case for, it hasn't always been the case. And so basically a linear economy is an economy where you source the raw material and you send it to manufacture, and then you get the product, and then us as the consumers, we consume the product, and then anything that's left over is designed to go to the landfill or incinerated. And so items and products that fall under this single-use disposable economy are things like straws. Like I mentioned before, plastic utensils, plastic cups, Ziploc bags, saran wrap. If you buy your cereal, that like plastic film bag that holds your cereal, a lot of packaging, all of those items are being designed to go straight to the garbage, to the landfill, or to be incinerated. Then we've got a recycling economy, and it's slightly better. So a recycling economy is similar, where you source the raw material, you manufacture the product, you consume the product, and you recycle it a couple of times or reuse it or whatever, but it still ultimately ends up in the landfill or incinerated. So an example of that is our lovely plastic water bottle. Can you recycle plastic water bottles? Yes, you can. Can you recycle it infinite amounts of times? You can't. So plastic water bottles aren't sustainable because they can only be recycled a couple of times before A, the material begins to weaken and cannot be made into something new again, and B, sometimes this plastic water bottle will be made into a park bench, which is cool, or some type of fabric or nylon, or, we have these really cool pens that has recycled bottle contents in it. So maybe your bottle will be made into a pen. I don't know. But then what happens to, oh, and then also Adidas. Adidas came out with a brand of shoes made with recovered plastics from the ocean. It's what? Parlay? Parley, something like that, right? Cool, right? Okay, well then what happens to the pen when you no longer want it? Or the shoes when you no longer want them? Or the park bench when it breaks? It still goes to the trash. So we're talking about the product life cycle. So thinking about not just the product itself, but the packaging. What's the end of this product's life cycle when you don't want it anymore, and what to do with it? So a lot of it relates to the design and things like that. So this circular economy is an economy that essentially, like here, is an approach to resource management that conserves, repurposes, and recycles what otherwise would be burnt or buried into valuable assets that contribute to environmental, economic, and social well-being. And this circular economy is something that was very profound in our culture way before plastics came into the picture. Think of the milkman. That's what the circular economy is trying to do. And this is also known as the zero waste economy. How can we think about, products, designing products that can be captured in some way, shape, or form and being reused again, and essentially prevent things from ending up in the landfill. So I will admit, a lot of work has to be done on the front end of things. A lot of work. I mean, we're talking about infrastructures and governments and systems and manufacturers, and a lot of key players have to come into play when they're designing products. A lot of those things can be overwhelming for us consumers, but fear not, there is something we can do still, something that we can do here at the grassroots level on the back end, known as the zero waste lifestyle. So notice it's lifestyle, so we're not here preaching how you should live your life, but what we want to do is kind of educate you on how to just generate less waste in your day-to-day lifestyles to be able to live as closely to this zero waste concept. So have you guys heard of the 3 R's? Oops. Right? What are the 3 R's? Reduce, reuse, recycle. It's that slogan that's been embedded in our brains since we were little, right? But it's not just a slogan, it really is key, reduce, reuse, recycle. However, these days, the 3 R's really aren't enough anymore, and there are, I'll be honest, lots of R's out there, redesign, rethink, so many. But we're just gonna talk about the 5 R's here: refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle, and rot, in that order. And the 5 R's were actually, they've been around for some time, but the lady who really put this on the map, her name is Bea Johnson. I don't know if any of you have heard of her before, but she actually lives in a zero waste household, and she has a family of 4 and a dog, and they generate enough trash in a year to fit inside of a mason jar. Crazy. You're like, wait, what? And she preaches the 5 R's. So refuse, what do you think refuse means? Say no. That's the most important one, I think. When you say no to unsustainable products, when you refuse things like, you refuse disposable diapers by using cloth diapers. You bring your own water bottles, so you refuse the single-use plastic water bottles. Those little tiny things really do add up. So the more you uninvite waste to begin with, the less waste you have to send to the landfill in the end. So saying no is really, really important. And then, of course, we cannot say no to everything, right? And so then we're going to reduce what we could not refuse. So, for instance, you can buy in bulk to eliminate waste, excess waste. Winco has a great bulk section. The food co-op has a pretty good bulk section. A lot of grocery stores are starting to integrate bulk sections into their systems. And it's a great alternative because, of course, when you're talking about products and their packaging, I mean, it's really hard to get around that, right? But when you're buying in bulk, you're cutting back on the excess waste that is created by the packaging. And so after you've refused and you reduced, then you reuse. So this is also really key because essentially this is when, if you cannot find a way to reuse an item, then that's when it becomes trash. Because even recycling and raw is trash because you don't want those items anymore, right? And so, for instance, when you're shopping and you're looking at those products and the packaging that comes in it, that's when you start to think like, oh, is there a way I can reuse this after I'm done using it? How else can you reuse this tin can instead of sending it to the recycling center? You can put things in it, right? You can use it to store pencils, you can put your makeup brushes in there, you can put, I don't know, you can plant a flower. It does require a little bit of creativity to kind of think outside of the box and find those creative uses. I mean, you could reuse a glass bottle like this for water, and I don't know. But don't let that deter you from trying. And if you're not feeling particularly creative, hop online. This is a movement that has been well adopted by millions of people across the globe, and I can assure you that people have come up with really creative ways to reuse a lot of items. Mason jars, for instance, have been having a great year these last couple of years because they're so versatile. You can use them to, store your lunch in and your toothbrush, and you can use it as a cup for water, and there's just so many ways you can reuse a mason jar. And so then finally we recycle what we couldn't refuse, reduce, or reuse. And of course, recycling comes at the end almost, because recycling on its own is no longer enough it's a beneficial solution, but it's not the solution. And so when we're recycling, we want to make sure that we're recycling properly because it's the system. We don't want to create contamination at the recycling center, because if we contaminate a good load of recyclables, it gets sent to the landfill. And so you've got more information here about what can and cannot go in your recycling bin at home. And then lastly, we rot or compost, which we talked about in great detail this last time. Okay, so full disclosure though, zero waste and plastic free are aspirational labels. Setting off with the mindset that you will create absolute zero waste right away is unrealistic and incredibly hard to do in our current situation here, okay? I've tried. It's very stressful. And so what this lifestyle is trying to get you to do is to try to make those small changes that are significant and working with the resources you have to inch closer to zero waste. Like we learned with Bea Johnson, she managed to reduce her waste so much that she was able to fit a year's worth in a mason jar. It's still waste, but she is really inching towards that zero, and that's kind of like what we should try to do, is always try to find a way to downsize, finding better opportunities for certain products, and most importantly, educating yourselves over the products that you're supporting, because it all starts at the cart, right? When you're going shopping, that's when you're creating that essential waste, because we're a consumer-oriented society, right? We like to buy things, and we have to think about what we're leaving behind when we no longer want those items anymore. And so I've broken it down into 2 easy steps that we'll go over briefly. So when you're taking a look at this lifestyle, you want to evaluate. So first off, I think it's important to ask yourself, why are you even interested in decreasing your impact? Is it because you're trying to cut back on your impact, your carbon footprint, because you care about the sea turtles and the environment, because you want to save money, because you are just trying to declutter and rid yourself of all this junk that you've accumulated. There has to be some sort of movement because this is a lifestyle change and there's a lot that goes into it. And then once you figure that out, then you conduct your own mini waste characterization study at home. Take a look at your garbage can. What sort of garbage are you currently producing and what types? Because this will essentially give you a better idea. Is there a lot of to-go containers, a lot of, single-use forks and napkins and food waste? It'll start to give you a better idea, and it'll orient you in that proper direction when it comes down to cutting back on your waste. And then we have this other question. What do I actually use on a daily basis? What's in my daily routine and what do I not use or need? So again, looking at your daily routine and what are those products that you just reach for constantly and what are the ones that you don't? And again, because this will actually help you decide what you can start to reduce when we're thinking about the R's. And then the products that you are using every day, do more sustainable options exist for those products? Can you swap out the plastics for things that are made from natural cloth or fibers, from tin, glass, steel, things like that? And then finally, how much and what do you need to actually really be happy, right? Do your items spark joy? And this is also important because it's like, well, do you really need that giant foam finger in the back of your closet in order to be happy? When you go to festivals, do you really need the free t-shirt and the tote bags? When you go to conferences and concerts, do you really need those like pencils and pens and things like that? So determine what it is that you need in order to be happy. And so once you've evaluated, then you start to transition. And so when we're transitioning, I think the easiest thing we could all do is refuse single-use plastic water bottles by bringing your own. And luckily, a lot of facilities are kind of on board with this concept and are installing those like hydration flask stations where you can just refill your own water bottle at airports, a lot of campuses and things like that. And it might seem like a very minor transition, but honest to God, like if you think about how long you've had this, your reusable water bottle and how many times you've refused single-use plastic water bottles, it starts to add up over time. And the same thing goes for, bringing your own bag to the grocery store and refusing the single-use plastic bags as well. It's a big, you'll start to see it once you start to apply this to your day-to-day lives. Produce bags as well. There are products in the market, or you can even make your own reusable produce bags that will hold your fruits, your loose fruits and your vegetables when you're grocery shopping. And that way you won't have to use the single-use plastic bags. And then you've also got other products, which is pretty exciting because this zero waste concept, I'm sure have you heard of this concept before, zero waste? Okay, when we were talking about this a couple years ago, people were still kind of confused about this sort of buzzword, but luckily a lot of corporations, manufacturers are really thinking about the product's life cycle and the packaging and are creating products that can be reused, recycled, or composted when you're done using them. So that's kind of where educating yourself comes into play, really taking a look at what products are out there and determining which ones you can swap out for those things that you use every day that aren't sustainable. Okay, so I talked about Bea Johnson, but I also like to talk about Lauren Singer. Have you heard of Lauren Singer before? Okay, I suggest you look her up. We don't have time right now, but she is a 20-something-year-old lady girl who lives in New York, and kind of the same thing as Bea Johnson. She managed to cut back her waste enough to fit inside of a mason jar as well. Like I'm telling you, mason jars have been having a great year and lots of exposure. You can put your trash in there if you want. So she, studied environmental science, was advocating for the environment, and one day she realized that she wasn't living with accordance to her lifestyle and her values with her lifestyle. And so she took a step back and was like, I'm really creating a lot of waste and I need to start to do something. So she created this blog, Trashes for Tossers, where she basically writes a lot of what her experience is like transitioning to a zero waste lifestyle. She has a lot of tips. She also has recipes for making your own products, which again can and cannot work for some of your guys' lifestyles depending on the time that you have. But she makes a lot of her own products, deodorant, toothbrush, things like that, or toothpaste. And now she's opened her shop, which is called a package-free shop, where she sells package-free items, and then those products are 100% recyclable or compostable or reusable in some way, shape, or form. And so we do have a similar shop here in Reno. It's called Black Rock Refill. And the lady behind this was also inspired by Lauren Singer and Bad Johnson, which is cool because this is what this lifestyle does. It inspires people to also want to cut back on their waste, so much that we've got a shop that has opened up and they sell a lot of great alternatives to single-use plastic items and materials like shampoo bars and shampoo conditioner bars and refillable dental floss and mouthwash tablets and the produce bags and bamboo toothbrushes. There's a lot of products on the market, and you can buy them online, or you can support local and check out Black Rock Refill. And on that note, there are a lot of businesses in Reno too that are also trying to mitigate their waste, and it's good to know what's kind of out there. For example, H&M, they have this great take back program where if you take a bag's worth of textiles in any way, shape, or form, socks, towels, bed sheets, things like that you don't want anymore, they will take it back. They will give you, I think, a discount or a coupon, and then they'll recycle. I think they'll turn it into rags. But it's a great alternative for things you don't see yourself donating because those items are just disgusting and nobody should be wearing them. You can take it to them. And then, of course, Patagonia has a great system where they fix a lot of the gear that they sell. They repair the gear for you. The Hub, Tussle, a lot of coffee shops are incentivizing consumers to bring their own bags or their own cups, and they'll give you discounts off of your drink as well. Places like Winco, Save Mart, Rayleigh's, they'll also give you discounts for every bag that you bring that's not plastic. So it's good to know that those are options out there. And then lastly, like I said, everyone's lifestyle is different, and so what you decided to adopt into your own lifestyle and find that it works for you, I think is the perfect opportunity for you to also voice what you've discovered that works for you and the products that you've discovered, and tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers, let people know these sort of changes that you're adopting, because like I said, this is a movement and it's inspirational, and people generally want to do the right thing, and so it's not about a handful of people doing this whole thing perfectly, but a million people doing it imperfectly. And that's it. I went a little over time, but not too bad. Thank you guys so much for coming.